So what is a real Independence Day? Is it 4th of July or is it June 19th? Right? You know, that's a trick question, right? So let's talk about Juneteenth and a quick history lesson I'm sure wasn't in your high school textbooks. In this quick video, I want to share just how Juneteenth came to be and also why it matters today. Now, this video is for everyone, but it is especially for my non-Black friends who consider themselves to be allies or social justice warriors, right? So let's get started. Most people think the U.S. ended slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, right? Wrong. That was more of a you're free in theory kind of a thing. But it only freed enslaved people in the Confederate states that were still rebelling, right? Quick side note, this was during the Civil War, which was basically a fight over slavery, right? The history books will say that it was about states' rights, but it was mostly about the right to enslave other human beings. But another video for another day. So back to Juneteenth. While other enslaved people across the country were celebrating their freedom, Texas did not get the memo, right? No email, no text, no Twitter, no TikTok, right? It was 1863. So it took 2.5 extra years for the message to arrive to Texas. And so on June 19th, 1865, a Union general pulls up to Galveston, Texas, and announced that slavery was over. Like, hey, you know you're free, right? Unbelievable. But that is what we now call Juneteenth, the day that freedom finally reached the last enslaved people in the United States. So Black people in Texas, they turned that day into a whole celebration, right? It was a celebration of survival and freedom and finally getting what should have never been denied in the first place. But while it was a big deal in Texas for years, Juneteenth really wasn't a nationwide celebration until 2021 when it became a national holiday. So, as a country, when we think about the celebration of freedom, we are typically taught about the 4th of July, 1776, right? But the independence and freedom we celebrated at that time was really only afforded to white men who owned land, right? If you were an enslaved person, a woman, or an indigenous person, you were excluded from that freedom, right? It wasn't until 89 years later that Black people got their freedom. And so Juneteenth is a celebration of that, of Black resilience, of Black joy, culture, liberation, and the contributions to this country, right? It's also a reminder that freedom wasn't instant. And that freedom didn't even arrive when the laws passed. It arrived when the laws were actually enforced, right? So speaking of laws being passed, the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't even a law. It was an executive order signed by the president. Sound familiar? Right? It was actually the 13th Amendment that legally and permanently abolished slavery in the United States. And that didn't happen until after Juneteenth and at the end of 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation helped to start the process, but it didn't finish the job. Now, that's something to think about as we reflect on the current political climate, but that's again another video for another time. So to my friends who consider yourselves allies and social justice warriors, I want to invite you to do 3 things, right? As we celebrate Juneteenth. Thing number 1, I want you to learn your history, starting with this video, right? Not just the comfortable, warm and fuzzy parts. And by the way, thank you for watching to the end of this video. Share it with a friend. I do hope that this quick little history lesson helps you to understand why we proudly say Black Lives Matter, not because other lives don't, but because at one point in our history, laws and practices made it clear that Black lives didn't matter in this country. The second thing I want you to do is to celebrate Juneteenth. Now, you might not be invited to the cookout, and that's okay, but I invite you to use your personal and professional platform, right? To just talk about Juneteenth and why it matters. Now, that could be at home at the dinner table, or that could be at work at the water cooler, but just start the conversation. Also, consider supporting a Black-owned business, not just on Juneteenth, but regularly and intentionally. Lastly, I invite you to use whatever privilege you believe you have to fight systems of oppression that still treat freedom as optional. I want you to ask yourself, what does freedom mean in America today? And for whom? Right? And that question is amazingly relevant today. Now, with that, happy Juneteenth, y'all. Let me just say this before I close. Freedom sure took its time, right? But the fight for justice, now that's still on the clock.